thank you so much once again for joining us, Bjarte. It's a great pleasure and a true privilege to be with you. And on behalf of this group, we are very, very grateful for the generosity, and this is the right word, the generosity of sharing your precious time with us. We're above all, thrilled to be here with you. And we know that you receive many invitations from all over the world, and this only makes us even more grateful for the opportunity of having this conversation. And so, Bjarte, this is a group composed by business and thought leaders of many of Brazil's leading companies and institutions. And under this leadership program, we are debating critical issues every month, not only about the professional life, but also about life from a broader perspective. And on top of that, we have special sessions with leading thinkers like yourself, who are, our guides to think better about these subjects and, of course, to act accordingly. And you don't need introductions, but for the sake of starting this event in a more formal way, because we are recording it, I'd like to highlight to all participants that Bjarte is the author of this very nice book here. This is Beyond Budgeting, a guide to more adaptive and human organizations. It's been newly released last year, 2023. And also he's the writer of Implementing Beyond Budgeting, Unlocking the Performance Potential from 2016. And he's the chairman of Beyond Budgeting Roundtable and the founder of Bogsnes Advisory. And Bjarte has almost 30 years, not 30 years of Beyond Budgeting experience, having worked in both finance and HR. And he has headed 2 Beyond Budgeting implementations at Borealis and Statoil, which is now Equinor, and has helped numerous companies all over the world getting started on their own Beyond Budgeting journey. And he's a popular international business speaker with more than 20 years of leadership experience, and is the winner of a Harvard Business Review McKinsey Management Innovation Award. So, Bjarte, without further ado, and based on our previous conversation, perhaps we could start off with some of your thoughts about your wonderful and timely book, and then move to some questions from myself and from the members of our group, whom I also greet and thank very much for being here. Okay, so please feel very welcome. And if you'd like to share your presentation, please also feel very welcome.
Yes, let me do that. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Very good. So again, thank you for the invitation. I've been really looking forward to this. The author, Douglas Adams, he once wrote that I might not have gone where I intended to go, but I think I ended up where I needed to be. And I'm sharing those words because that's really the story of my professional life, because it was in no way given that I should be here with you today and talk about Beyond Budgeting, because my career started in a very different place. After graduating from business studies a long time ago, I joined a company called Statoil, today Equinor, which is quite active in Brazil, as you might know, also. And my first management job in this company was head of the corporate budget department. So I've been heading up more budget processes in my life than I want to be reminded about. But then 10 years later, when I worked in a subsidiary called Borealis Petrochemicals, we got the chance to kick out the budget back in 1995. We got the same chance to do it in Statoil/Equinor 10 years later, 2005, introducing a process called Ambition to Action, which the company still has. And a few years ago, I made a difficult decision to leave Equinor, which is a great company, to be able to work full-time on Beyond Budgeting, because there's a massive interest all over the world. So it's busy days. But again, it started in a different place, but it also means that I think I know what I'm talking about. As you will find out in this session, Beyond Budgeting is about more than budgets. It's about changing traditional management, how we think, how we lead, how we manage. In order to do that, to change traditional management, we also need to change the budgeting process, because that sits at the core of traditional management. So hence the name, but again, think about this as business agility. Every time I discuss Beyond Budgeting with executives, finance people, others, there is one word that keeps coming up over and over again, and that word is control. And the context is, of course, the fear of losing control. And when I hear this, I ask people, explain to me, what do you mean with control? Explain to me what you are so afraid of losing. And after people have said cost control, actually many go quiet. They struggle with putting words on what they are so afraid of losing, which I find interesting. So I checked up in Oxford Dictionary, how do they define control? And they call it the power to influence or direct people's behavior or the course of events. And what does this mean in organizational terms, in business terms? Well, it basically means two things: controlling people and controlling the future. And behind these two lies the two main assumptions behind traditional management. Number one, you can't trust people. Number two, the future is predictable and plannable. And we don't think this is true. And that is what we are challenging in Beyond Budgeting, because we believe this is more illusions of control. Of course, you can manage people, but if people are managed in stupid ways, they hopefully find a way around to get their job done. And when it comes to the future, the only thing we know is that we don't know. Wise people out there have very much agreed with what I just have said. Good old Peter Drucker, most of what we call management is about making it difficult for people to do their job. And I can relate to this because sometimes the problem actually is that we manage too much. Another wise person, Russell Ackoff, he compared a lot of the planning, budgeting he was observing, especially in larger organizations. He compared it with a ritual rain dance. It has no effect on the weather, but those who engage in it think it does. And again, I can very much relate to this as well, because I, again, have done a lot of dancing in my life through all the budget processes I've been heading up. I think the dancing was great. But to the extent it had an effect on the performance of the company, I think that was actually, looking back, negative and not positive. I often use traffic as a metaphor when I'm trying to explain what we are trying to achieve in Beyond Budgeting and how we are thinking. Because think about it, in traffic, we are also trying to achieve good performance. And for me, that would be a safe and good flow. And here are two different and opposite ways of achieving that. We have the traffic light, and this traffic light, by the way, has no sensors. And we have the roundabout. And it's actually proven scientifically that the roundabout is more efficient, because here people have the authority to act on fresh information. Whilst in front of that light, the one who decides when you can drive and when you have to stop, that's the person who programmed this light. And the information that person would have used would not be entirely fresh information, right? Some historical trends, some forecasts. So these are two very different ways of managing, at the same time, we also know that the roundabout requires more competence from us. It's more difficult to drive in a roundabout. And going back to our organizations, everything we need to leave behind of traditional management, including budgeting, is in many ways much easier for everybody involved. Executives, finance people, this takes more competence in a broad sense. It changes work, but in a positive way. It makes our work, whether we are executives, finance people, others, managers, more interesting, more meaningful, more forward-looking, more continuous, less silos. I mean, the list is long. I don't think you will find many people in Equinor wanting to go back to the old days, even if there was some resistance back almost 20 years ago. But it's not enough with fresh information and the authority to act on it. If there is a value set which is about me first, I don't care about the rest. That mindset is normally not a big problem in front of that light, overruled by the red light. But in the roundabout, me first, don't care about the rest, is a big problem, because here we are much more dependent on other people, and we have to help each other, interact with people in a very different way than what we need to do in front of that light. So again, self-regulation is important here, and two important words. Trust, of course. We are not trusted to make decisions in front of that light. In the roundabout, we are. Transparency, not important in front of the light. As long as you can see the color, you can make your decision. In the roundabout, you need to see and understand the entire situation. So again, this was a kind of warm-up to some of the thinking beyond budgeting, to go to more self-regulating management models based on an assumption that you can actually trust most people, even if there are some kind of black sheeps among them maybe. And the future is not predictable and plannable. So this is about both leadership and management processes, and that is why the principles address both of these dimensions. This tagline is important: performance the right way. Beyond budgeting changes how we define performance, how we deliver performance, how we evaluate performance, and how we reward performance the right way, as we see it. And again, you can see we address both leadership, management processes. If you look at what we say on the left-hand side on leadership, I mean, we are not alone in saying these things about what kind of leadership is needed: purpose, values, transparency, autonomy, and so on. There's a number of other models and communities. But if you read many of the leadership books, they have not reflected very much about what kind of management processes are needed to activate these good leadership intentions. And this is what Beyond Budgeting provides, not just spells out the required leadership, but also how to activate it, make it real through management processes, running from target setting, forecasting, resource allocation, performance evaluation, rewards, and also the rhythm or the coordination of all of this. So we are very focused on the coherence between these two, between what we preach on the left-hand side, what we practice on the right-hand side. And that's an issue in many organizations, because they might have the best intentions when it comes to leadership, but it doesn't help to have these theory Y that you might be familiar with, leadership intentions, if there are theory X management processes. And a classical example, it doesn't help to talk loud and warm about how fantastic employees we have, and we would be nothing without you, and we trust you so much. But kicking out a travel budget, are you crazy? I mean, this is hypocrisy. Poisonous gaps between what we say and what we do. People notice, and the words become hollow because the management processes have the opposite message. And what we do speaks 10 times louder than what we say. Let us not forget that. These are principles. What this should mean in an organization, that depends on that organization's business, culture, history. Some people get frustrated. They want the recipe. They want to understand exactly what this should mean. Well, of course, we had a lot of recommendations on what it could mean, but that thinking should be done by you more than by us. We can help, we can explain, we can provide guidance, we can give examples of practices, we can connect companies with other companies, but nobody can do this for you. That's important. Two classical misunderstandings related to Beyond Budgeting, both are linked to Principle 9, resource allocation. Some people think this is just another way of managing cost, given the name. Yes, it is, but as you can see, there are 11 other principles. This is quite a full and coherent, consistent leadership management model. Second misunderstanding, Beyond Budgeting, no budget. That must mean that cost is not important. I can spend what I want. No, that's not what we are saying. Cost is still important. It is important to create value, and money will often be a constraint. But we need more intelligent and effective ways of managing cost than what a certain Mr. James O. McKinsey offered us when he invented budgeting 100 years ago. This is pretty old management technology. He had the best intentions back then to help companies perform better. Maybe it did back then, but today it's doing exactly the opposite. It has become more of a barrier than a support for getting out the best possible performance. Some people, when they see these principles for the first time, they find them a bit overwhelming, almost a bit scary. And I can understand that. If that is the case, we have some good news. We have a very simple, practical, tested, logical way of getting started that later can take you into these bigger discussions. And it goes back to asking ourselves a very simple question. Why do we budget? And that is a question with more than one answer. Because we use budgets to set targets, financial targets, sales targets, production targets. That's one purpose. We also use the budget, or we want the budget to give us a kind of forecast of what next year could look like in terms of profit, cash flow. So forecasting is the second purpose. And the third purpose is resource allocation, handing out back some money to the organization on OPEX, CAPEX. And it might seem very efficient to solve all of these in one process and one set of numbers. But that is a problem. Let me explain why. Assume that we are moving into a budget process, and upstairs, let's assume that finance, they want to understand next year's profit and loss, cash flow. They start on the revenue side, asking responsible people, what are your best numbers for next year? But everybody knows that what they are sending upstairs will most likely come back to them as a target for next year, often with a bonus attached to it. And we all know what that insight might do to the level of numbers submitted. Moving to the cost side, OPEX, CAPEX, the same people, other people are asked, what are your best numbers for next year? But everybody knows that this is my only chance of getting access to resources for next year. And some might also recall that 20% cut from last year. And that insight and that memory might also do something to the level of numbers submitted. And I think you know which way they will move this time. This is a problem, not just because it destroys the quality of numbers, but also because it stimulates behavior that is at least borderline unethical. The lowballing, the gaming, the sandbagging, these are not behaviors that we would like to see between colleagues. At the same time, I'm not blaming anyone for behaving like that, because these people are just responding to the model, the system we have designed for them to operate in. So if we want to change behaviors, it's not about fixing people. It's about fixing systems, which again changes behaviors. And that is what Beyond Budgeting offers in this area, a system fix through saying that these are still important things to do, but we need to separate them in 3 different processes because they are different things. A target is an aspiration, it's what you want to happen. While a forecast is an expectation. It's what we think will happen, whether we like what we see or not. Brutally honest, 50-50 outcome. And resource allocation, that is about optimizing what is often scarce resources in the best possible way. And because we've separated here, we can, for instance, allow targets to be more ambitious than forecasts, which they typically should be. But more important, this separation enables us to improve each one in ways impossible when it was all bundled in one process and one set of numbers on the left-hand side. Now we can start to have great discussions about how can we think about improving the way we set targets. And one little tip we have here is to think relative. And what do we mean with that? Well, let's think about football. I have yet to meet a football team saying that the ambition for next season is to score 39 goals and get 42 points. Those are budget goals, and those teams, they don't think like that. They think in terms of league tables or doing well against others and hopefully better than everybody else. And that relative thinking can also in some areas actually be applied in business when it comes to how you set targets, measure performance. Then we can start to work on the forecasting process, getting out the politics and the gaming by helping people to understand that this is just the forecasting process. It's not a bid into a target negotiation because that's a separate process. It's not an application for resources. That's also a separate process. It's just the forecast. It's not a promise on something you shall deliver on. We want to deliver on targets. We use forecasts to help us get there. We don't need a million details here. I mean, we are looking at the future with uncertainty, ambiguity, complexity. That is very different from looking at to the past through accounting, where decimals and details makes more sense because there's no uncertainty. And it's often required as well through the accounting. But we can't apply the accounting mindset. We can't bring that with us when we turn from looking to the past to looking to the future, which is what Beyond Budgeting is about. And last but not least, how can we find more intelligent ways of managing cost than what Mr. McKinsey could offer us 100 years ago? And of course, this is where most of the questions are. I'll come back to this in the Q&A, but let me just give you a little taster of what it could mean. If you go back to Equinor, Equinor has the company invests between 10 and 15 billion US dollars a year. There is no traditional investment budget where you sit in the autumn and make all decisions, exactly how much to invest, exactly split on which project, and then you hand out these bags of money as next year's investment money for each project. That's not a process. Instead, there is a process based on a very simple principle. The bank is always open. And where does that principle come from? Our private life. Because let's take off the employee or manager hat for a minute and think about our private life. Let's assume that your car just broke down. You need to buy a new one. It's April, you go to the bank and you ask for a bank loan, and the bank tells you that, sorry, we are closed for that kind of activity, only open for that in October. And of course we laugh because no bank would say anything like that. And I think we would laugh even more if the bank then added on that, by the way, I see that you have some money left on your account. If you haven't spent it by December, we will take it. And of course we laugh, but that is what the budgeting process is about. Anyway, what in Equinor, the line can always forward the project for approval at any time. Whether you get a yes or no depends on two things. How good is your project and can we afford it as things looks today? And that information is coming out of fresh, unbiased forecasting information. Do we have the financial capacity? Last but not least, then when we have separated, we can organize each of these three on a rhythm, on a cadence that not just better reflects each purpose, but also the kind of business we are in. So more event-driven, more business-driven, and less calendar-driven. This is an important slide for two reasons. First of all, when people tell me that you can't operate without a budget, I show them this slide and I tell them here we still do what that budget tried to do for us. But because we've separated, we can do each one in so much better ways. Second, again, I said this is a nice, simple way to get started. But when you move into those improvement discussions, then you very often naturally move into bigger beyond budgeting discussions. Target setting, what really motivates people. Resource allocation, again, do we need detailed travel budgets if we say we trust people, and so on and so on. So I've helped around 40, 50 companies all around the world getting started over the years, and with the big majority of these, this is where we started out. Very simple, very pragmatic. This is something that people understand. A number of companies are on this journey today in some form or shape. And I assume you are looking for Brazilian companies. We do have Semco still up here. I haven't checked up on the status of that company lately, so please help me understand if they should still be on here. If you have other companies that we haven't heard of, we would love to hear it.
Bjarte, just for you to know, this Vagas, I think it's a Brazilian company as well.
Ah, it is. Oh, yes, you're right. Yes. Ah, sorry. Yeah, you're right. Yes.
We have Schneider Electric here also in Brazil. We have other companies.
Yeah, but I'm sure, but you have them as daughter companies of. So we have them in here as a German company in this or French company in this. But anyway, I mean, this was not a test of how many Brazilian companies. It was just a taste of that. Yeah, quite a variety of businesses, different parts of the world, even if there still is a concentration in Europe. And the pioneer here is a bank. You see it at the top in the middle. It's a Swedish bank called Handelsbanken, which operates in Northern Europe.
Yeah,
Quite big.
and just to mention that before our conversation, we were warming up when talking about Humanocracy, you know, the book by Gary Hammer, who wrote the foreword of your book. And
Yep.
so we show it the Handelsbanken business case. So just for you to know that we have just talked about it.
Then I won't spend any time on it. It's just a fascinating case, right? With no budgets, no targets, no individual bonus, just great performance since 1970. Amazing case. But they are not the only one. If you go to the upper left-hand corner, there's a company called Miles, Norwegian IT company. No budgets, no targets. If you work for Miles, you can buy whatever PC you want, as expensive as you want, replace it as often as you want, as long as it's within the technical standards. No PC budgets. You can attend whatever conference course you want, wherever you want, as expensive as you want. No travel budgets, no training budgets. But it's not an anarchy. When you have bought that PC, when you have returned from that training, you have to post on the intranet what you did and the cost of it. So they simply use transparency as their control mechanism, and they have no problems whatsoever with cost. One thing, I'm getting towards the end here, one thing that has happened lately is that the big consulting companies have become seriously interested in beyond budgeting. That was not the case many years ago, and we have been operating since 1998. But over the last 2-3 years, almost everybody have approached us and want to work with us. And I mean, we are not naive. I mean, in the sense that we know we come from different places. We might have different agendas. So we've had thought long and hard, but we actually ended up with a yes, because we would rather help these companies, and especially the clients, to succeed with beyond budgeting instead of standing on the outside and watching them fail. And 2 of these consulting companies have actually done surveys among clients and others about how does this stuff work. And BCG is one of them, and this is what they came up with. How do companies, practitioners experience? I will not go through this in detail, but it seems like this is pretty good stuff with some pretty good effects. And the most profound one, actually, a very good direct financial benefit in the terms of increased sales. Bain & Company had a slightly different angle. They have defined a group of companies which they called leading companies in financial planning. And then they compared to which extent are these leading companies applying these principles compared to the rest. And this is what they came out with. Again, quite seems to be a clear connection between being defined as leading and thinking beyond budgeting, applying beyond budgeting. So that's what I wanted to share with you. This was the very short version. I mean, this is the shorter version of all of this. My previous book has a more normal kind of size, 250 pages, but I on purpose wrote this as a thinner, more condensed book to reach people with limited time to read, because there are many busy people out there. That's why the book is also out in an audio book. So that's what I wanted to share with you. These are my coordinates. And if anybody wants to follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn, then this is the only stuff I write about. I mean, I promise there's no cats and dogs and grandchildren, only beyond budgeting, I promise. And this is the address to the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable. That's an international network of companies, individuals interested, and a link to my simple, small website as well. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And I see there was a hand up. Should I stop sharing my slides, or is the question to one of the slides, Antonio?
Yes. Perhaps we could just go now for the Q&A here with the big mosaic. And so, Bjarte, thank you once again. It's been wonderful, quite insightful. And just before moving to the questions from our friend here from the group, I'd like to start off with a couple of questions. And I also would like you to know.
Can I take a picture before that?
Oh, yes, this is very important. A picture to register this moment.
Yes, please. So let's I don't know if anyone will open the cameras, but 1, 2, 3. Okay, perfect.
Did it work? Yes?
Let me see. Yes.
Okay, so Bjarte, and also I'd like you to know that I've been promoting your book because I really believe in your ideas, and I think you've been doing a wonderful work. Because it's very important, to release, I think, the human and economic potential of companies, and I really believe that we are been running industrial age and tools and systems in a post-industrial age society. And I think this mismatch is, of course, something that cannot end up with a good outcome. And so I have a lot of questions here for you, but I'm going to start off with a twofold question. And the first is, why most companies are eager, to look for product and service innovations, but are typically afraid of trying management innovations, the way they do things. So what are the main sources of resistance in trying, these new forms of leading and managing? Could it be related with the power structures there are, of course, part of the companies? And so this is the first part of the question. And the second is, how does, the beyond budgeting model influence, leadership styles and organizational culture? So more specifically, is it possible to implement all of this with a command and control mindset?
Well, to your first question, I think, first of all, I think many haven't realized that there is something called management innovation. I mean, when they think innovation, they automatically think about technology innovation. But if they start to think about management innovation, then that enthusiasm they have around technology innovation is replaced with fear, because this is kind of scary. Kicking out the budget, are you crazy? The other thing is that this has much more implications for executive beliefs and behaviors than any technology innovation. So this includes themselves, that they have to change, which isn't the case for the other kind of innovation. I think that's part of the reason. And what they haven't understood is that you can get just as much competitive advantage out of management innovation as you can from technology innovation. If you look at the products and services that Handelsbanken offers, it's nothing unique at all. They find their competitive edge in how they lead and manage. And to your second question, the answer is no. Of course, I mean, because the most challenging part of doing this is not changing what we do. Because if you look at the management processes we recommend in Beyond Budgeting, there's no rocket science, not at all. What is challenging is to change how we think. Right? We need to change our mental models, and the mental model of command and control. If you kind of bring that with you into a Beyond Budgeting implementation, then you might do new things with the old mindset, and it's kind of, excuse the expression, same shit you're wrapping. So that is why, we need to change the way we think.
Wow, fantastic! Thank you so much. And Antonio, please.
Thank you, Bjarte. Thank you very much. I'd like to get back to the principles that you mentioned. Among the 12, there was the rewards on 11. Can you explain a little more how is the approach to rewards on the Beyond Budgeting process, please?
Yeah. Yes. No, I'm glad you asked, because that is also important. I mean, we are in line with most research out there, quite skeptical to individual bonus, which is not very meaningful for knowledge work in knowledge organizations. So our recommendation is common bonus schemes. For instance, how is the company doing versus other companies? That is the scheme that, again, Handelsbanken is running. So no individual bonus, but how is the company doing versus others? Then an alternative might be some kind of business area or kind of team bonuses, which is better than individual. The only challenge is that if there are independencies between teams, between business areas, then that is actually problematic, because then the whole purpose of having different schemes or different common schemes for different business areas is that the outcome shall not be the same for everybody. And what happens when a business area comes out with a lower bonus than a neighboring business area, then, I mean, they will feel this is not fair. We help those guys, right? We have interlinks. Why should they get more? And so that kind of potential happy feeling that you get among those who got a bit more is completely wiped out by the pissed off feeling of those who got less. So if you want to take this below company level, you have to make sure it's between units that are independent of each other. And in this, I'm not saying that money is not important. By all means, I mean, I've been on individual bonus schemes for most of my career. Of course, I enjoy the money. That's not the issue. The issue is, again, back to what is best for motivation. At the same time, we are very clear in saying that if you can't get rid of individual bonuses, it doesn't have to be a showstopper. But if you have it, what is very important is that you take into account that principle that was standing above rewards, namely performance evaluation, a holistic performance evaluation. So you have to look at, and also how you set targets. So if you have individual bonuses, what you have to look at is what kind of targets are driving those bonuses and what kind of performance evaluation do you have. And the holistic evaluation we recommend means that it has to be about more than just comparing two numbers and then conclude, and then the bonus is calculated. You have to look at all the things you know afterwards that you didn't know upfront. Changes in assumptions, tailwind, headwind, and so on and so on. And in Equinor, actually, how you delivered, defined through the values, actually counts 50% into that equation, where what you delivered actually then constitutes 50. So you can still have it. We don't recommend it, but if you have it, then think about what kind of targets that drives these bonuses and how you evaluate performance.
Wow.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Angela, please.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your being here, Bjarte. It's a great honor to have you here and hear all of that. And in the miles example that you said about the cost of travels and events and etc., you put the word transparency about that. And I would like to hear you say a little bit about the ethical dimension of the approach of beyond budgeting, because it puts the ethical dimension, it puts the ethical test in that person again, to the person to tell publicly or tell your mom. If you would tell your mom, then it's okay. If you put publicly, then it's okay. It's an ethical test, and if you put it publicly, it will pass. So what other examples that you could give us and about this ethical dimension in the beyond budgeting methodology, process, and approach, and other examples that you could give about this relation?
I mean, what you point to is very important. So I'm glad you asked that question. And kind of more examples, just a few reflections on how we think here. Because first of all, I mean, transparency is a very powerful mechanism, so it should be applied with wisdom. And if it becomes naming and shaming, then it doesn't work. And that is why we should position transparency always much more from a learning perspective than from a kind of control perspective. How can we learn from each other if everything is secret? Learning is a positive kind of angle into this, and that kind of control effect through transparency you get in any case, right? But you don't need to talk about that. I mean, talk about we do this because we need to learn from each other. The other thing is that in miles, this at least used to be done down on an individual level, right? Which can be an issue from at least these days because of GDPR. But in Equinor, again, no travel budgets, full transparency around travel cost, but we stop on team level, right? So we don't need to do it on individual level, because within a team, people know, I mean, what kind of traveling colleagues are doing. So we don't need that transparency on that area, but between teams, it can be useful. And even here, there's a learning perspective. I mean, if you see somebody finding a cheap hotel in a city that you're going to visit, I mean, give them a call and ask, I mean, how did you find it, right? So, but I think learning here and keep it on team level, not on individual.
Thank you. Ika.
Thank you. Bjarte, I have a couple of curiosities or doubts, if you may say so, but okay. they are connected, let's say.
Okay.
So first of all, considering the last statement that you put in the slide, when you appropriately brought that today's world requires that this process being dynamic because changes happen. So my first question is, the way each one of the three components are revised, do they occur independently or simultaneously? So that's the first question.
Can I take that first before I forget it?
Okay.
And when you say three components, you think about the separation of the budget purposes, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's a good question. Are they independent? Well, we should try to make them as independent as possible, but of course there will always be some links. But if people perceive the forecasting they are doing as something that will influence the targets that later are set, right? That is an issue. One way to split that so that it becomes more independent is to say that when it comes to targets, when it comes to targets, then we think football. We set relative targets. So on financial, non-financial metrics, and now I'm mainly thinking internally in a company, in a kind of friendly competition where it's just as much about learning as about kind of doing well against others. And if a relative measurement or target is not something you can make a forecast against. Right? You can only forecast your own kind of expected performance, but not the ones of the others. So you have, by simply the choice of metrics and measurement here, separated the two. And of course, there will always be links between what kind of resources you get and, or often what kind of resources you get and the targets you achieve. But here is more about still making that resource allocation as dynamic as possible. It's more about making decisions at the right time. So what is so meaningless in a traditional cost and investment budget is that we sit in the autumn every year and make all decisions for everything that should happen, which is meaningless. So the more later you can take these decisions, the better decisions you make. But of course, I mean, those will hopefully, the resources you spend have an impact on the targets you are trying to achieve. But here again, it's back to who knows best what kind of resources are most effective in achieving those targets. That's not typically, that information does not typically sit at the top in companies. It typically sits out there. But so we're saying try to separate these as much as possible. Also by having different rhythms for when you change them, because you talk about dynamic and revising. You wouldn't change targets that often. Some targets could have some targets could be evergreen. The financial targets of Equinor to do well against 11 other energy companies, or more specifically, to do better than average on return on capital employed, shareholder return. Those targets have survived for 20 years, right? Forecasting you would do more frequently, and resource allocation even more frequently, actually, for costs all the time.
Yeah, and I think to a certain extent, the second question that I had, you tap it into the reason I had a question, because the first layer, considering the fact that the target is much connected to inspiration or aspiration and really motivating. So let me just take the derivative question of that separation. considering that the vast majority of the companies that you showed in the chart, these are public traded companies, global companies. So they release their forecasts to the market, to investors, to shareholders, to stakeholders, to the community. So would you consider that more frequently this dynamic process would require maintaining communication of the dynamics of the forecast instead of the target, and keeping the target for something like his foundations of the direction that the institutional believes? So that's the question.
Yeah, no, but it's a good question. And first of all, when you say the forecasting given to markets, you know, and it is guiding you are talking about, and you know, this guiding is a strange thing because it's a mix of kind of promises about which is targets and forecast. This is what we think will happen. So it's a strange thing as such. The benefit for listed companies that do go beyond budgeting and separate is that the basis for giving guiding is a much better one compared to if you only have a polluted budget number to base your guiding on. Right, because in a budget number, you don't know which of the purposes are kind of pulled the numbers in which direction. It's polluted. When this works, you have forecasts that the executives know they can trust. Then they can decide what do we want to share with the market. That's a different discussion, but you have much better basis for doing it. And when it comes to how often, I mean, most listed companies, including Equinor, are not changing very much when it comes to the rhythm of what they do against the market. If you look at their statutory reporting, it's still done typically quarterly, and they still do the guiding, many of them on the rhythm that they used to do. But again, I mean, if you have rolling or dynamic forecast, then you have reasonably updated forecast at any time that can be the basis of the guiding. But we see a trend of listed companies moving away from guiding, not giving these promises to the market, or giving different promises. I think that's very positive because there are often some negative spill effect from external guiding into internal processes. And I think what the market in the end they want performance, right? I recall when Equinor decided to skip external absolute guiding, then investor relations were quite nervous because then we introduced this relative thinking, the football thinking, and the reaction for the market was next to nothing. I mean, okay, go ahead and prove it, do well against peers. And there was some analysts saying that this is what we do all the time. We probably benchmark you guys more than what you do yourself, right? So, yeah, that was a long answer, but those were good questions.
Very good, very good. Nilsson, please.
Hello, Mr. Bjarte. Congratulations. Hi. And thank you very much to be here and have this opportunity with you and to learn a lot now. My question is, what are the organization assumptions or prerequisites to adopt the concept of beyond budgeting? And what should be the first step?
Well, I think those two questions are related as such, because what we always recommend is for companies to start out with developing a very clear case for change. Why are we doing this? What kind of problems are we trying to solve? Because if you haven't done that up front, when you are moving into design and you have to make choices, shall we do this or that? Then you need something solid and understood to go back and test to which of these solutions would best solve the problems that we defined. So start with, and then and also talk to the organization about what are we what is it we want to achieve? Not just solving these problems, but we want to move to something that's better. What is that better? The better job you do here, the easier everything is afterwards. The next step we then propose is the separation of the budget purposes that I talked about. Very simple, very practical, but a great way to get started. And once you start on those improvement discussions, you are on the journey.
Perfect. Thank you.
And if I may complement Nilsson's question just before Lucas, Bjarte, it's the following. One of the most fundamental beliefs or assumptions, as Nilsson has said, of beyond budgeting is, of course, that people are trustable. And this is made clear in principle number 4, which says that trust people with freedom to act. So my question is, from your interactions with business leaders from all over the world, do you believe that most executives indeed have this positive view of human beings? And if not, do you believe they would be willing to revisit their mental models on this critical issue? How could they do this?
Yeah, well, first of all, to add on to my previous answer, an additional starting point is for an executive group to think through their view on those two assumptions that I started out with. To have that discussion about what kind of employees do we generally think we have on board, generally, and what does our business environment look like? And when they have concluded on that, those conclusions must have implications for how the management model look like. So the next, they have to look then at the management model. If this is what we believe about our business environment and about the employees, is it reflected in our management model? And that can be part of developing that case for change, because you realize you have gaps. Of course, if an executive committee concludes that no, we can't trust most of our employees, well, they will probably still operate in a dynamic, and or back to, if that is the conclusion, then I think they need to look at the recruitment processes. If you have generally recruited people that can't be trusted, it's not these people's fault. And somebody has done an awful job on recruitment. Or could those behaviors that these executives have observed, could they be linked to management processes? Because if you treat people like criminals year after year, maybe some would start to behave like criminals. Right? Management processes drives culture and behavior. That's important. But again, having those two reflections on the world out there, people in the organization, what you see have to have implications. And again, even if you don't trust your employees, the world will still be dynamic, unpredictable, a lot of VUCA. And that you can't run away from, right? Because that is where most, when executives make that assessment, very few end up saying that, no, our business environment is stable and predictable. It might be some, but even those guys, even for those, beyond budgeting is relevant, right? So, even in a stable environment, this makes sense.
Do agree. Lucas, please.
Thank you. How do you think my question is a bit related to the last one. In your experience, how does the implementation of beyond budgeting differ across the different environments? And I mean here different countries or corporate cultures or industries. So do you see that it influences the process of adoption of this system and the difficulties that it faces and the resistances?
If we start with different businesses or industries, what we see is that the problems with traditional management, including budgeting, seems to be very similar across businesses, even between private and public sector. And also many of the solutions are this separation of budget purposes seems to make sense almost independent of what kind of business you are in. When it comes to cultures, of course, there are cultural differences. And again, Equinor operates globally, but the model the company has and the principles, that's not just for the kind of the Nordic region. They apply globally. But of course, there are more issues some places than other places. That means that we need to roll up our sleeves and work even harder with it. But there is a kind of flip side to this as well, that, I mean, if you take the US, where Equinor is quite big, Equinor recruits from its competitors in the US. And one competitive advantage has actually turned out to be the management model. That people know that this is a company that operates in a different way, and they want to work for those kind of companies. And that kind of maybe different that pool of maybe different thinking Americans has so far been way big enough for the company to tap into, even if this might be in not resonate 100% with traditional US business thinking. But I mean, your management model can be a competitive advantage in many cultures. I would argue. Then, of course, some parts of the beyond budgeting is kind of culture independent. I mean, rolling forecasts, relative targets, more dynamic resource allocation is less culture sensitive than others.
Great, wonderful. And Lara, please, and we're just moving to the end of our session here. Nice to see you, Lara.
Nice to see you. Hello, I have a question, because I was in Roche when Bill Anderson and then they started the process of non-budgeting. I was CEO of Venezuela, and then after in India, and we had to present, instead of budget and numbers, we had to present story. So they gave us courses of storytelling and we had to present it. My question is the following. When I was implementing it in my country, what I saw in different strategies, I saw that the language was very important. Yeah. Because the language we use, like targets or whatever, and the way that we use, it changes a lot the way that you see everything. So when we started to change language, and when I asked my people how can we change language, and then when we started changing language, it starts changing mindset. And I give an example. Instead of talking about targets, and I mentioned to them once, instead of talking about targets of number of medicines sold, we were measuring number of patients saved. And then the forecasting, so the targets were patient saved. The forecasting was number of vials that would have to be produced to save this number of patients. And then the numbers that the team offered, they were like almost 2 times the number that we had, and we were even scared because how can we do it? And it was happening. For me, language is super important. And I just am very curious to know what is your opinion about it, and why normally people are not talking about language when we are talking about transformation and changing processes? Why we don't talk about language? Because for me, language is what builds culture. And I'm just curious about it and your opinion about it.
No, it's a very interesting reflection, and I fully agree, because language is very important, and I'm very sensitive to language as well. And we have some recommendations on things that executives and managers, finance people, no longer can say, because it doesn't make sense in this world. You can never talk about kind of delivering on a forecast, right? That's meaningless, right? We want to deliver on targets or ambitions, or what we'll call it. We use forecast too. And if somebody is coming to you with a good forecast with bad news, then the budget response is come back with better numbers. The beyond budgeting response is, okay, what do you intend to do with it? That is a different response with a very different meaning. The last thing I want to say about language is that there are some labels in the corporate language that I actively dislike. The list is long, but my favorite is on that list is performance management. Yes. Which it's awful. I mean, just think, chew on it, right? Aren't we actually saying that if we don't manage your performance, there will be no performance? It's very negative. And I think there's lots of illusions into that label as well. I think our ability to manage performance in today's people and business realities is actually quite limited. I think we need to talk about enabling performance instead of managing performance. And that is what Beyond Budgeting is doing. It's about enabling performance, creating conditions for great performance to take place.
And I think
Wow.
that just something interesting is that the way that the board presented to us, instead of making targets and measuring targets, they were telling what is the outcome that you want to achieve and how you will see the outputs. So during the year, we had an outcome that we had to achieve. And then we had to measure monthly the outputs, and we had to plan what are the outputs that will bring us to the outcome. And the outputs were in collaboration with teams. So this was the way that we were being measured. It was not performance management, it was outcome management. So this change of the language and approach helped everybody see everything different. So there was no pressure.
No, I mean, I think that's very fascinating, and I think it's part of the development of a Beyond Budgeting journey that you also start to change language. One small reason for kind of keeping that target word in there is that it makes things a bit more recognizable for people who are new to this and are getting started. So if you immediately start with also a lot of words they don't recognize, then I think that's one reason why scaling Agile has been so difficult. Because if you try to scale Agile and you start to talk about Scrum, I mean, the executives might think it's some kind of skin disease, or that Slack is about laziness and Sprint is about running faster and continuous delivery is about 24/7. I mean, that Agile language, which makes sense in software development, can be a barrier when you try to scale it. So we have tried to use a language that finance people, executives can relate to, but then talk about how can that be done in a different and better way. So, but along the way further on, by all means, think about the language, and the best companies, they don't have targets at all.
Bjarte, well, I would have ideally two last and tricky questions, but I don't know if you're hard on time, so please just let me know if I can move on.
I'm flexible, don't worry.
Just to make use of this great opportunity. And the first one is on the role of the board of directors in helping or hindering the Beyond Budgeting movement. You know, we have many board members here in this group, including independent directors of large companies. And in your opinion, what is the role of the board of directors in, let's say, steering their companies to promote management innovations such as the Beyond Budgeting ideas? And can we say that sometimes, the board may be actually an obstacle for management innovations such as those proposed by Beyond Budgeting movement, and so how independent directors can support their companies, to try different ways to lead and manage?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's also an important question, and a board can be a barrier or a support. And they can be both very effective at both. But still, this doesn't have to start at board level, right? It doesn't even have to start at the executive level. I mean, I think in Roche, then it didn't start at corporate level. I think it started, maybe in Sweden? So this is things that can start out there and grow upwards. Of course, at one point, the board needs to not just be involved and understand and then hopefully support, but it doesn't have to be on day one. The other important message to the board is that through that separation of the budget purposes, we are still doing what that budget tried to do for us. So I think this kind of kicking out the budget is a bit misleading, because I mean, it's the traditional way we are kicking out, but what that budget tried to do for us, we still do. Target setting, forecasting, resource allocation. Because we have separated, we can do each one in much better ways. So who can be against that? I mean, even the board, they will have discussions and be presented for better targets than budget targets. They will get better forecasts than they get through budgeting, and they will get the more efficient use of resources in the company through the more dynamic resource allocation. So this is good news for everybody, including the board.
Yes. And my last, I promise, a provocative
And
question is about and I'll hand over to you, okay, to conclude, Angela. And so it's about the role of business schools and business education on management innovation. So to what extent, current MBA programs help to maintain this status quo on management practice, including the budgeting process? And do you believe, that the focus of these programs has been more on developing managers who replicate this status quo or on leaders that challenge this status quo? So have you seen change in the business education in the past years that can make us more hopeful?
First of all, I think business schools are doing even more damage than boards, because the big majority of them keep preaching the old stuff, and actually, if you look at business schools, I mean, they don't develop stuff, right? They kind of kind of take what's out there and teach it, and they don't want to be too provocative, most of them. But there are some exceptions in Scandinavia. Then many of us, including myself, are teaching at business schools. I've been doing it for 15 years, and it's a wonderful experience. A bit challenging, actually, with some bachelor students when you come in and talk about beyond budgeting, because their only reference are the textbooks that talks about budgets. And in those books, it seems like a very logical, practical, obvious process. A big difference teaching executive MBA students who have work experience. They get it immediately. But I've had wonderful experiences. I got a call the other day from a woman who said, I was at your session 10 years ago at business school. Today I'm the CFO of this company. Would you like to come in and talk about beyond budgeting? So it's about kind of sowing these seeds, and more and more of them start to grow up. So there is hope, but with the exceptions of the Gary Hamels of this world, I mean, not too many are teaching the right thing.
Yeah, fantastic. I fully agree with that. Angela, please.
Well, my last question is, I don't know if it's a more philosophical question, but I'll do it anyway. So the numbers, they have been important to the knowledge of humanity and our evolution. And I would like to know from you, when we got so lost that we got to the point that we value more numbers than the reality in itself. So we changed totally our perspective. So instead of we value the knowledge of numbers to explain the nature, like the Fibonacci sequence or other kinds of numbers and thinking, we put the numbers instead of the reality itself. What do you think about it when we got lost?
I haven't thought that much about it, because I'm since it has happened, I mean, it's kind of what we need. The important thing is to get out of it, more than understanding when it happened. But of course, I mean, if understanding when it happened can help you to understand how to get out of it, that could be an important angle to it. But of course, there are some links here to the industrialization and all of that stuff. But I mean, more specifically, I mean, the budgeting process, then we can nail it down to James O. McKinsey 102 years ago. Then it was introduced. But again, it was done with the best of intentions, and in a different world, right? With more stability, more predictability, with less competent people on board. I mean, that was simply a fact. So, so again, back to the fact that things have changed, it's what drives the need for thinking differently. And when it comes to the numbers, that is why I love this. I mean, that statement so much about that. Not everything that counts can be counted, and vice versa, right? Exactly. I mean, that tells it all. So, but I think it also back to this illusion of control, because we think that we think if we can put numbers on it, then we understand it, we know what will happen. And you know this saying, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. I hate that one. I would turn it around. If you can't manage something that you can't measure, you have a serious problem, right? Yeah.
And actually, it's a misquote from Edward Deming's original quote. So but unfortunately, it got popular. So, and just to conclude, Bjarte, once again, on behalf of this group, I'd like to deeply thank you for your time, for your generosity to be with us. And I'm not going to say that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because we have the hope of listening and learning from you once again in the future. We are going to promote here in Brazil this Beyond Budgeting ideas, because I really think it's important for companies to know that. And it was a memorable occasion for everyone here, I'm sure. And so just thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much.
And again, thank you very much for the invitation. And I would love to come back. And if any of you are interested in kind of having sessions into your own teams or companies or whatever, then this is something I do all the time. And of course, that's the beauty of online, that we can be everywhere. So
yes,
congratulations.
Thank you so much for your generosity.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here until the very end. Thank you very much for all of you.
Bye-bye.
See you, huh? Thank you. Have a nice trip.
Thank
you.
Bye.